Hey everybody, I am gonna tell you guys about how to ask people about fingerboards. Let me share my screen real quick. So yeah, this talk is gonna be about a survey that I ran at the end of 2017 that asked people about fingerboard geometry. And thank y'all for responding, whoever did. And yeah, I did this big write-up on it on my blog originally, Fix It With Shading. And then I wrote it up for the Strad for their Making Matters in June 2018. So if you've seen it, then sit tight. There's going to be some new content after that. But if not, I will go through some of the results here, and then I will talk about geometric analysis. Um, and then I will talk about some geometric analysis that I did based on the results, based on the numbers that people gave. And then I will show you guys how to customize it to your own numbers. So see how you can apply it back to what you do and see if it informs you in any way. And then we can talk a little bit about the art of asking for information. So we're gonna get a little meta, and I'm gonna share with you guys what I learned about sharing information. So a little backstory. My experience with fingerboards and why I did this survey. When I first got to, when I had to make my first fingerboard in school, I was supposed to do 42 millimeters radius all the way up and down the board, match it with the template, try to get your gaps like, bigger on the G and then like a little smaller, getting smaller and smaller towards the E. And so I could not do it. I would always have like same gap size, G, D, and A, and then like little gap on E. And then if I try to fix that, then I would have good gap sizes and bad radius, like not matching the template anymore. Later on, I was taught to do it with a flatter radius at the nut, and that worked well for me for a while, got good at doing that. And then when I got to another shop, I had to go back to doing the single radius up and down the board. And I still couldn't do it. And at that point, I was like, okay, I do have some tool control now. So there must be something else going on. There must be something else going on. And so I finally, when I got to runings, Chris Adel was like, oh, plot it out. And so he showed me how to plot it out. Where's my screen? Yeah, so this was me until I finally understood that there are just too many constraints to achieve one single radius. So like to define all three of these points radius while also defining all three of these points. You can really only tell it to do 5 of these 6 things, and the 6th thing will just be determined. So I got really interested in figuring out, first of all, how many people do this? How many people do the single radius all the way up and down the board, and how do they deal with it? What do they end up sacrificing, or is there some like magic trick that I'm missing? And so I wanted to find out about that, and I wanted to see how common it was to do other methods to make those dimensions work out. And then I wanted to also find out what are those dimensions actually. So like if you have 5 dimensions defined, what is, yeah, solve for the 6th is what I wanted to know. And so yeah, let's get into it. So fingerboard survey and results. I will just go through the results and you'll find out what the questions were along the way. So first question was, how do you treat the radius? This is all assuming the same radius at the bridge end, which is basically determined by the bridge curve itself. Here we'll just, for shorthand, I'm just gonna say 42 millimeters as a stand-in, or like as the example number. And so basically for one radius all the way, that's 42 millimeters all the way across the board. About 48% people of my 67 responses, 48% said that they do it this way. The colors on there indicate, there was a question later in the survey that said, where do you prioritize, where do you rank the adherence to your radius template, or like, making that curve really proper. And half of the people who do it with the one template all the way up and down rank that as their very first priority to match that. About 22% of people do it with a flatter curve at the nut. And then about 22% of people do it with a tighter curve in the middle. And then about 7% of the responses said they do it with getting tighter at the nut. So just progressively getting tighter, like a conic section. I did get some comments from people. I thought this was very informative for me. Somebody who does one radius all the way commented that it's okay if the G, D, and A strings all have larger gaps because they are lower tension than the E and thicker. And so as far as action goes, it feels okay, and they need more room to flop around. And so this person was not concerned with the string sizes, the gap sizes being incrementally smaller towards the E. Somebody who commented, these are just selections of people who commented and were okay with posting the comments. Somebody who does flatter at the nut cites that it's mostly for comfort for the player. So the left hand doesn't have to climb over the strings, and chords are easier to play cleanly. And then the tighter at the middle person, somebody responded that they actually make the board 42 at the bridge end, and then a little tighter at the middle, and then actually slightly flatter at the nut. So this is something that my survey did not really accommodate, but this person basically does a combination of the two middle options there. And then the last one, somebody wrote that the radius is tighter at the nut and then flattens out as it widens towards the bridge, allowing dead purchase for double stops and such in high positions. The next question was about string scoop gap size. So this is a little bit unconventional way to show it, but I was asking for people to tell me what the gap size was right at the middle of that scoop. So like how big is that? And then as you saw earlier, my modeling for this is with arcs and with a 3x3 grid. A circle is defined by 3 points, or can be defined by 3 points. And so that's why I went with 3 points instead of asking for the gap size under all 4 strings, because that would just complicate the math. I should do that for a compound radius. But anyway, so the graph here shows the sizes of each string, and I just stacked each string on top of it of the other. So basically, each of these lines represents a 1/4 millimeter, and then each of these vertical bars represents an individual response. So down here, the minimum gap size that 2 people responded using was no gap at all. They just make it flat. So there's no scoop at all. The most common group was this 27% group, which is 1/4 millimeter under the E and then 0.5 millimeter under the center line, which represents the D and the A string, and then the 3/4 under the G. Next most common group was a little bigger, so everything 1/4 millimeter bigger than that, and then the close after that was 0.5 millimeter, and then so 0.5 millimeter under G, D, and A, and then 1/4 millimeter under E. The survey, if I were to do it over again, I would have let people write their numbers in as they wanted to, instead of having to round it to the 1/4 millimeter, because in my survey also didn't accommodate like just how much gap somebody might have used. So the maximum the person who responded with the most gap size said that they do 1 millimeter under the E, and then over 1 millimeter each under the rest of the strings. So yeah, the average was 0.42 under the E, 0.57 under the center line, and then 0.76 millimeters under the G string. The second bar down here is the same thing, like showing individual responses and how people do their ratio of E to G, basically. So the G is the red lines and the E's are the blue lines. And the most common ratio that we had were 1 to 2. So G string gap twice as big as the E string gap. And then second most common was 1 to 3, which is basically all of these 0.75 to 0.25 ones. And then some people do it totally equal under all 4 strings, or maybe not under all 4 strings, but at least under the E and the G. Then I asked some other questions, but those first 2 questions are going to be the ones that that inform the geometric analysis later on. But yeah, so this question asked about the scoop size along the edge of the board. Some people scoop it, some people don't, but yeah, so basically this shows the blue is on the E side, on the treble side, and then the red is the amount of scoop on the base side, the base edge. And for the most part, you can see everybody does it pretty equally. There's, if anything, there's more larger gap towards the base edge than towards the treble edge. This influences the amount of, or like the apparent edge thickness. And so that's one reason why people do it. Other reason is for keeping the board skinnier further down so that it's more comfortable to the hand. But yeah, for the most part, people do it about equal. Some people don't do it at all. This question was about lifting the flat part of the gluing surface of the board beyond the neck. Basically, how much do you lift it at this end? And this is another way of handling apparent edge thickness. But most people, about 60% of people, don't do it at all. So yeah, I have some comments on that later. I also asked where they bias the scoop towards. Do you do it more towards the nut, or centered, or more towards the bridge? Most people just keep it centered. 76% responded they do it just right in the center. The next question asked people to rank string scoop gap size, string scoop symmetry, radius, and edge thickness in order of most important to least important to them. Or like, which ones they don't compromise on, basically. So the way this is laid out visually is vertical bar, again, represents each person's response. And then the first priority, I just showed it like bigger on here. So yeah, and then getting smaller and smaller. So if you kind of blur your eyes, then you'll see that there's a lot of red and a lot of green, and that just basically means that a lot of people find string scoop gap size really important and radius really important. So the most common permutations were gap, radius, symmetry, then edge, and then radius, gap, symmetry, and edge. So basically, that is why all the geometric analysis coming up is mostly about the gap size and the radius. So we're going to do a little geometric analysis where we're quantifying the fudge. So, wherever there's wiggle room, we're going to quantify what that is and say, what is geometrically possible, or what it would calculate out to be, basically. There's 3 ways that I'm going to show you how to do this. So we're going to draw it ourselves, can plot it, and then we'll read it off of a graph. And then I also made a 3D model that is free and available online to anybody. You don't have to download anything. Okay, so draw 50 animals. Those books that I would always check out from the library when I was a kid. Show you how to draw like the framework for something, and then you get to be like, bam, an elephant. We're gonna do the same thing, but with fingerboards. And so this is a great way to understand how your dimensions interact. This works for anybody. So if you want to do this for cello, you can plot it out for a cello with a funny Romberg. If you want to do it compound radius, you can plot it out this way. The limitations here are we're going to draw it based on 3. I mean, you can draw it with 4 strings actually, but the way that I'm showing you here is you can draw it with your 3 scoop lines, and then you're going to draw it with your 3 radii here. So here we go. First thing to do is set up your drawing, and before you even set up your drawing, you have to know your string spacings. So we're going to draw, we're going to have our nut spacing, and then most people know their bridge spacing, and then basically what we're trying to find right now is the spacing at the end of the fingerboard. So you can either calculate it with math, or you can just pick up an instrument you have lying around that is to the dimensions that you typically do, and then just stick your ruler here and measure the distance between E and G right at the end of the fingerboard. So that will come out to about 30.7. If you do the math, then basically, yeah, plug in your proportion of fingerboard to string length, and then use that to determine what this width would be, what number that is between 16 and 34. So all the drawings I'm doing are based on those numbers: 16, 34, 270, 330 for string length. So basically, draw your center line, draw your horizon, and then you're going to, so we're drawing a fingerboard, like, looking at the end of it like this, or looking at the end of it like this, depending on how you want to see it. And so, yeah, draw your center line, draw your horizon, and then draw your spacing at the nut. So here I've drawn it 16 apart, and then draw your string spacing at the end of the fingerboard, which according to my calculation was 30.7. So that's your framework, and now you can draw 2 arcs over it. So so these are all the dimensions that we're gonna get to eventually, but this is the order that we're drawing it in for this particular one. So we're about to draw same radius all the way. So basically draw your radii first. I drew the 42 millimeter radius here and 42 millimeter radius there. And you can just, if you have a template, then just trace it on. If you don't, you can Francois Denis it. So set your compass to 42 and scribe a little mark from there near the center line, and then do it to the other side, and you'll get the point where you need to stick your compass to draw a 42 millimeter radius that connects from here to here. So that's, yeah, you can do it that way. Next step is to get your midpoints. So this is as if you stick your straight edge across from, like along the G path, and you are going to be measuring you're going to sort of be seeing your scoop gap from the center there, right? And then you're gonna have the do that for the other three strings. It's a little confusing looking in this middle one because you're gonna draw it right over the center line. So just, do it right. Just do it and yeah, trust it. So then for this one, we're gonna solve for the gap that results from here if we use a 42 millimeter radius here. So we're gonna drop down G and E and connect a circle, a little radius across those 2 points. And then now you gotta remember where your you gotta remember where your midpoints, your cat. Okay, you gotta remember where your center line midpoint was, and then now from there you can measure that final bit. Did that move? No. Okay, you can measure that final little gap from the midpoint of these 2 points to the center of or to where that radius hits, basically. And you will see, if you draw this very accurately, or you can draw it like giant if you want, then you will see that that gap is 0.68 millimeters. And so, yeah, that's the first option. We just drew same radius all the way. And so then what happens if you wanted to draw it where you set everything except for the nut radius? You want to see, flatter at the nut, but like how much flatter? So you're going to draw the things that are known first. So draw your 42 millimeter radius at the end, and then you can work backwards basically from the other one and draw out your midpoint here. Drop it down the correct amount. So we're doing 3/4 millimeter and 1/4 millimeter here. And then connect it with another 42 millimeter radius, if that's what you want to do. And now you're going to measure up from the center of that 0.5 millimeter. So that's if that's the gap size that we're talking about for the center line. You can measure it halfway up, and then basically that point that it gives you there, you're going to double that distance from there to there, because that is the midpoint of the center line. And now you have your third point down here. You can connect a radius. You can draw a circle with these 3 points down here. So these are the 3 nut points, basically. As you can see, this makes the nut very, very, very flat, 79 millimeter radius. Option 3 is similar method to option 1, but instead of drawing that radius first and then seeing how big that gap is, we drop down the midpoint here 0.5 millimeter, and then we use the remaining 3 points to draw a nice circle, and the radius of that circle is 38 millimeters. So yeah, the last one, option 4, tighter radius at the nut. For this one, I personally haven't done it this way, but somebody who did select this option wrote that they make the radius proportional to the width of the board. So if this is 24 up here, then they would use a 24 millimeter radius there. And yeah, so if you plot everything out, then that solves the middle radius to 33 millimeters radius. Okay, so what do all these look like against my 42 millimeter radius template, since that's kind of like the practical way for people to check things, just like to have a template and slide it around. So yeah, 1 radius all the way, obviously, it would look like 42 all the way across. And then the ones of note are these 4, which are not 42. So that 79 under your template would look like this. even though it's like much flatter, you know, the gap isn't like, it's still kind of big, but like basically it's not a very large span, so you know it just doesn't come out to be that crazy. But yeah, that's what it looks like there. And then over here, radius of 38 for the middle of the board, looks like that. So you know, if you do it this way, like, is this about what it looks like under your radius, under your radius template? Make a comment, whatever. And then option 4 would look like this. So that's pretty round, and actually like adds a lot of height to the board, which is interesting. So that would affect your neck thickness, your maple thickness. So anyway, second way to process all this information is to think about setting 4 dimensions. So setting, in this case, we're setting nut radius and bridge radius, and we're setting the G scoop gap size, and then we're setting the E scoop gap size, and then we're letting these last 2 variables, just seeing where it plots out. So if we define these other 4 things, for any given middle radius, what does that centerline scoop size solve itself to be? Because there can really only be one option each time, since this is highly constrained. So yeah, so when I was trying to figure this out, then I was gonna, you know, plot out what I knew. So, you know, I know that option 3 was right here with a tighter radius in the middle. So middle radius would be 38, and then that would give you a gap size of 0.5 millimeter. And I knew that if you plotted it at 42 here in the middle, then it would you would get a gap size of 0.68. And so I was gonna go draw a bunch of dots here and like figure out what the relationship was. Like, is it gonna curve? Is it gonna be like kind of linear? And my sister saw me doing this. She's a professor of mechanical engineering, and she was like, MJ, you know, you can do that real easily in MATLAB. And I was like, oh. And then her husband overheard and was like, oh, he's a electrical engineer at Bell Labs, and he was like, MJ, don't use MATLAB, use Python, it's way better. And then they like fought about it for a little bit, and then they raced, and 5 minutes later I got this chart from them, which was great. So I got some free programming done. It was only like 3 lines anyway, but yeah, so basically the resulting line, this resulting line here shows all the possible combos that will give you those 4 measurements. So 0.75, 0.25, 42, 42. And then here we have other possibilities, basically. So there's that big line we plotted out for gap sizes of 0.75 and 0.25. This line would be if you do a little bit less. So if you do 0.5 millimeter under G and 0.5 millimeter under E, these are all the possible combos of middle radius and centerline scoop gap. In general, like we kind of just operate in this like 38 to 42 zone. So if you are a single radius all the way person, then this is 42 here. And interesting. Okay, so what I'm seeing here with this G gap being 0.5 and E being 1/4 millimeter, this is saying that if you use a 42 millimeter radius, you will have a gap size under the center line of something like 0.55 or whatever. I can't, yeah, something like 0.55. And that's bigger than G. So good to know. So maybe, you know, your operating area for if you are using smaller gap size here would be like, don't go any bigger than 40 and a half millimeter radius at the middle. and don't go any smaller than 36 if you want your centerline gap to be between the sizes of G and E. Okay, so that's how you use this chart. You can also plot out two other things here. So what I'm plotting out here is the relationship between the nut end radius and the middle radius. So this assumes that all these other things are set. So 42 millimeter radius at the bridge end, and then a 1/4 millimeter gap here, and a 1/2 millimeter gap here, and a 3/4 millimeter gap here. So those are the first 4 dimensions I'm defining. And then we're just seeing what the relationship between these last two are. And so I've plotted out 2 of these things here. And if you plot out all the possible dimensions from there, then you get this big swoop of a line that kind of flattens out towards the end. And so that kind of shows you why if you wanted to do 42 in the middle here, then you have to go way far out, and your nut radius will be like 79. And so if you think about that comment from a long, long time ago, somebody had commented that somebody commented that they kind of do a combo of these two. They do a little flatter at the nut. So that would be, going this way a little flatter at the nut, and then a little tighter in the middle than 42. And so, yeah, that person basically exists in this zone somewhere. And that's pretty cool that they knew. But, also interesting to note is for any of these up here, like it does get tighter than 42 somewhere. Anywhere, anywhere, any of the solutions above here, there will be a point somewhere where the radius is smaller than 42. Okay. All right, our next beautiful method of playing with fingerboard geometry is on Onshape, which is a program, a 3D parametric modeling program for engineers that is online, so you don't have to download it. And it's free to use, so you just have to make an account. If you make an account, then and follow the link that I'm going to throw in the chat, then you can play with it yourself. So you can do some of the things that I'm going to show you, which are, so you would export it and make your own copy of it. And then this is basically set up exactly the way I showed you in the Draw 50 Fingerboard series. But the variables, all the variables are variables. So you can change them to whatever you want. So if you go over here on the right, there's like this 3 little boxes, and down here is variable table, and this will list out all your variables. So for this one, I typed in 16.5 as the nut string spacing, and then bridge string spacing of 34, fingerboard length, string length, G scoops. I put E scoop as 0.3 for some reason, and then so basically you type in whatever you want here, and then this particular model here, the way that I drew it here, it leaves the nut radius as the last dimension to be automatically calculated by the model. As I was saying before, like you can define 5 of the things, and then the 6th one is just determined. So for this one, solve for nut radius, that's what we're looking at. You type in your numbers, and then you go here, and you can look at the resulting radius of the nut. So just click on that radius. It always shows up a little like chunky because rendering stuff. And this one's showing a radius of 80.75 millimeters, basically. So that's a little different from 79, which we got with the other one, but I changed some of the dimensions a tiny bit. So let's change it back to what we had earlier. Oops. So 16 millimeters, you just double click in there and then type in whatever you want. And down here we use 1/4 millimeter. And let's see what it gives you now. So now the radius is calculating out to be 79. 0.3. So yeah, pretty cool. It just automatically redoes it for you. The whole thing generates out. It does draw 50 fingerboards for you. So yeah, I set up 2 other ones. So I set up solve for center radius. So this one, you go off to the right and hit your variable table, and you can set everything again. So let's you can pretend this is let's pretend it's like a viola or something. Bridge string spacing 36. Oh, I am pretending it's a viola. Okay, so yeah, 17 millimeters, 36 at the bridge, 310 for fingerboard length, 375 for string length. Let's make a big old gap for the floppy G string. Let's not make it that big. That's too big. Let's be like 0.8, and then let's be like middle scoops of 0.6. And the E scoop, okay, I'm sorry, I called it G, mid, and E. But yeah, for viola, then, it should be C and A. But yeah, so we'll call this 0.4 because it's a fatter, floppier string too. And a cat. And so nut radius, let's call it like, what did I have written there already before the cat jumped on it? 70? That's kind of okay. Move cat. Let's be like 42 or something, whatever. Yeah, 42 is our favorite number to play with. And then the bridge radius, we're gonna call it 38 because violas. And then so now what if I want to see what that resulting radius is in the middle, because this is solve for center radius. So that gets automatically generated, and it's giving me a radius of basically 35. So a little tighter than the bridge radius. Yep. Yeah, cool. Okay. And you can do solve for mid scoop. So here's solve for mid scoop, loading. Same thing here. You type in whatever you want. And then you have to zoom way in to see your little mid scoop here. And so we're solving for the scoop under the center line right here, and it's giving me a scoop of 0.5 if you type in all these things. So this basically, I typed in 42 radius of 42 at the nut, radius of 42 at the bridge end, and radius of 38 in the middle, and it gave me 0.5. If I type in 42 here, it'll solve for that middle gap again, regenerate everything, and boom, 0.68, just like we were saying earlier. So this tool is very fun. Type in whatever you want, and it'll automatically generate for you. And then if you have a CNC person, then you can just send it to them. Or, at least you can tell them that this is how you're modeling it out. You can draw a big arc under each of these scoops and then loft them together. And then you will have a fingerboard surface that you can CNC out if you so please. For the last few minutes here, I just want to talk about how we exchange information. So I'm going to go straight into this. MJ, where did you learn that? Here are the 4 places that I've spent the most time, or that have been the biggest influences for me. And you can see this like 3 different ways. I learned 3 different ways from these people. And I'm currently at Sam's shop, and after doing the survey, then this is sort of what we settled on based on what we learned from the survey. Because okay, so like I had a question earlier about why does everyone do it the way that is geometrically impossible, and the reason is because we are violin makers and we use templates and we use planes, and the tools that we do what we can with the tools that we have. And so if we want to be able to check, then a radius template is very convenient. If you want to do a gradually changing radius, then you either need to have multiple templates, or you can do the tilting your radius template on the board, which I find does not work for me. And So what we came up with was, well, we want to resolve the giant gap issue. So basically, if you overlap to 42 millimeter radius circles, then you would get like almost a Romberg-y thing, and then you would have just like a zone where you blend it. So yeah, so for me, when I make a template, when I make a fingerboard now, then drag my template, it'll match at the nut, it'll match at the bridge, and then you can drag it on like sort of one side and drag it on the other side, and then have like this blend zone. And this is, and you do that until you like your gap sizes also. So this is where we are. That's based on what we learned from the survey, which is based on what y'all all told me in that survey. Looking back at other influences, like where did all of these people get their information from, or where did my specific mentors at these places get their stuff? And you can see a lot of things like point back to Mittenwald for me. And then Sam has also influence from Becker, and a lot of influence from Renee Morel. And what's interesting to me here is like, yeah, a lot of things point back to the same place, but we still have like all this variation, even just in fingerboards. And so I guess obviously we have tons of other things informing our decisions along the way, but there's also a thing that at Sam Shop we like to call creep, which is basically like, if you, I guess the most literal example of creep would be if apprentice number 1 traces a template from Sam, and then apprentice 2 copies apprentice 1's template, and then the third apprentice copies the second apprentice, then like each time the template gets like a pencil width bigger, and then suddenly like the third apprentice's template is like a millimeter bigger than the original one. And this kind of thing can happen in many different ways, and it can especially happen when something is done by eye, or when it's like not dimensioned or not prescribed or templated. And so when that happens, then that's where like personal preference or individual preference really gets amplified. And then when people go back to meet each other, even like people from the same school or people who from the same shop, a few years later, like those things can sometimes add up and snowball into something very different. And so when we do get to go exchange things, when we get to learn what other people are doing, when we see people at Oberlin or at conventions, or we read what other people do in publications, sometimes it can be quite shocking. And there is a cat here, and I'm going to move the cat over there. And the clients, a really big factor is individual experience with clients, and that's also because clients vary so much as well. And then when everybody comes together with their creeping ideas of everything, and goes on the internet and tries to talk to each other, then sometimes strange things happen. And so yeah, the internet is another huge source of where we learn things, and it's also a huge source of where people fight. So I just wanted to share with you guys 2 word clouds that I found on the internet, that I didn't find them, I generated them from a post that I posted in my early days in school in Meisternet, asking about the Block platform. Like that, you know, some people graduate their plates all the way up to the end block, and some people like leave a ledge. So I asked I asked like, what's up with that? Who does that? Why do they do that? And then I pulled a word cloud from a post in Women in Lutherie asking about rib repair. And yeah, it's not, you know, there's, for me, the most significant things from this are that in the women in Lutherie one, I mean, like, it's not a direct comparison because like the question was very specific about method, and then the question in MeisterNet was like a why question. It's like sort of more general. But the women in Lutherie cloud is like very, very clear what it's about. It's about rib, glue, replace. And then there's also these like word softener, speech softeners like just, and then there's like a giant thanks in there, and then various other words. There's also like some like sympathetic, like try, like frustrating. There's like words about acknowledging like your state of mind and your feelings and encouragement and things like that. In the MeisterNet one, it's a lot of very general violin words, very large words, like the density of it. Like these is the, both of these clouds use, I think, the top 70 words from these. But yeah, the MeisterNet cloud is like very, very dense and very, very, yeah. So what happened in this post is I asked my question, a few people answered, and then they were like, oh, you know, this is, somebody's done a thread on this before. And then it became and then somebody hijacked the thread to present their own research that was like kind of related, but not really. And then it kind of veered off into like other discussion. And so that's why, yeah, like the focus, it just kind of like wandered away. And a lot of times I find people arguing on internet forums, and this kind of language gets used that's like, well, if you know, like if you really care about, or like if, you know, no one would ever, you know, those kinds of like very extreme language. And I think if everyone just keeps in mind like that concept we were talking about creep, this is sort of the issue that causes that. We ask and answer questions assuming a common framework, but in reality, we need to see more of the full system to understand someone's answer about a single piece of the puzzle. We sometimes don't know the scope of how our methods vary. And I think that is why surveys are super valuable. That said, surveying is not perfect. There is no universal survey. Somebody has to write it. Somebody like me, I brought my biases to the survey. If I did it over again, I would not have forced people to round to the nearest 1/4 millimeter increment. I feel like that influenced the survey in a negative way. And also, I wouldn't have, perhaps I wouldn't have asked like the bottom lift question like that one. That is just something that I thought everyone did. But I, you know, well, I guess now we know. But yeah, there are things that we bring to our questions that assume something like, oh, this is universal. Everybody thinks of it this way, right? So that's an issue in survey asking, and also in like general information exchange. And then measurement error and creep. This is also a big survey, like yikes, basically. So I think I answered like 3/4 millimeter, 1/2 millimeter, and 1/4 millimeter under the E for the scoop gaps. And later on, I actually used something to measure it. Like I'd always just done it by eye. It's like, oh, that's about a 3/4 millimeter. I measured it later, and I actually scoop 0.4 under the G. And so, yeah, I don't know how many people in the survey answered what they believe that they see. But for me, I know that I answered it wrong. So making sure that we're all talking about the same way of measuring and we're all on the same scales is also really important for sharing information. And then last, people get nervous about it. And there were a few people who said, oh, I can't wait to see the results and see if I was right. And that's not the spirit of the survey. We're just sort of putting out, what does everybody do, what's out there. And the reason why I want to do these surveys is it just helps you understand where someone's coming from. Like if it's like, imagine if our compound radius board came into your shop where you're only used to using the single radius template and making sure it matches all the way up and down. I can definitely imagine a scenario where somebody would be like, what are they doing over there, making a big lump under the board right over here? And hopefully, like by doing these kind of surveys and showing like where you are in the grand landscape of different methods that violin makers use, you could you could have a little bit better understanding of like why somebody would do something differently. For for fingerboards especially, like it is advantageous if you know what other people are doing, because first of all, like your client is used to whatever like model of whatever geometric model their fingerboard might be in. And so to do a drastic change would be imposing your biases onto what maybe they actually prefer over what they might actually prefer. And then second, like just material conservation. We're trying to save the ebony here, and to reshape the board every single time it is not fitting your model is not great if you can just like improve the concept that it came with, basically. So yeah, all that said, what else do we want to know? I would love to keep running surveys like this to help us all understand what everybody else is doing. And yeah, so just let me know in the comments or ask a question here. And that's it. Thank you for listening, and thanks for participating in the survey if you did.